Why, hello, everybody. Today on Applied Virtue, I'm going to be reading aloud a recent essay by author Edward Feser. I'm going to let people come in and settle down here. Just before I begin the stream proper, leave some, I'm going to make some announcements basically. First, I do plan on making I'm going to be making an edited video on internet ethics, and I hope to really delve into that. eh, Um, that and that might be a fun project. I'm not sure where to start yet, but um, internet ethics, there seems to be a lot of different areas that I can cover, from internet censorship to the ethics of lying online and being anonymous. Uh, then there's the kind and then there's the idea of, like, what is the internet even for? What would a And also social media relationships. There are a lot of different things that I can cover with internet ethics. So I hope that that is going to be an interesting series that's going to bring in a lot of people. I know that I've been getting a lot of new subscribers lately, and if you're new here, welcome, welcome. I'm always happy to have more people watching, enjoying my content. Um, it's it, it's nice to see that people appreciate my work, even if it's only just a handful of people. I I do it out of a kind of passion. I just love exploring these ideas, writing them down, and presenting them to others as sort of as sort of just my way of getting these ideas out there to at least one other person, because really that, I believe, is the point of YouTube, just to explore these ideas and get these ideas out there. So in any case, uh, I'm glad to see all of you here. Um, I'm going there. There's only a few people watching, but that's okay. It's not like my streams have a lot of people to start with, but I'm happy for each and every one of you who decides to watch. Today is going to be a very special announcement, mainly directed towards Catholics. Although, if you're not Catholic, you can stick around. There's going to be plenty of things to chew on for you too. I'm going to be giving commentary that will apply to anybody who is discerning religious faith, or has who is struggling with religion these days, um, and so on. Now, I've already read this article, and I'll post it. I'll put it up here. I've already read this article recently. It's by one of my favorite Catholic authors, Edward Feser. For some backstory, I'm going to zoom in on here, and it says here, I am a writer and philosopher living in Los Angeles. I teach philosophy at Pasadena City College. My primary academic research interests are in the philosophy of mind, moral and political philosophy, and philosophy of religion. I also write on politics from a conservative point of view and on religion from a traditional Roman Catholic perspective. So that's the kind of author that we're supposed to be. This is the kind That's the kind of author that we should expect from this. This is a very much a Roman Catholic author, and I think and I'm going to read aloud this essay and provide some commentary at key points. All right, so let's begin. Do Not Abandon Your Mother by Professor Edward Feser. In Catholic theology, the Church is not to be identified with a mere aggregate of her members, not even those members who happen to hold ecclesiastical office at any particular moment. She is an institution which existed before any of her current membership did and will continue to exist when they are gone. But more than that, she is a corporate person who can be said to think. Sorry, got something stuck in my throat. She is a corporate person who can be said to think and to will and to have rights and duties and other personal characteristics. Even more specifically, she is a person of a feminine nature, the bride of Christ, and the holy mother of the faithful, nourishing them through sacrament and doctrine in a way analogous to a human mother's nourishing of her children. Uh, Pause right here. This is something that Edward Feser talked about with regards to what he considers to be a very important part of Western philosophy, which is the idea of the corporate person. This is the idea that if you have a corporate body, a corporation, whether it be a political party or a joint kind of or a private institution or a government or what have you, a corporation has its own personality that exists above and beyond the individual members that make it up. Um, this is how we can say that the United States government says. Is it really the United States government literally saying that? No, because the United States government isn't a moral, isn't a person, a bodily person, but in a sense, the United States government is a person in that people can speak and on behalf of the United States government as an institution. And that's really what we're talking about here. So going on from there, for this reason, the character of the church is not to be looked at for in a snapshot of the members who exist in any particular generation, but rather in the attributes that persist through time. In particular, her doctrine, the mind of the church, is not to be found in the body of theological opinions that happen to prevail among laymen, theologians, priests, or bishops at some period of history. Rather, it is to be found in the formal teaching of the magisterium over time, both extraordinary, official definitive decrees of councils, popes, and the like, and ordinary, the consistent and constantly reiterated teaching of centuries, which, simply by virtue of this consistency and reiteration, is authoritative even when not conveyed in conciliar decrees, ex cathedra statements, and the like. Similarly, the holiness of the church's character is not necessarily to be found in the moral attributes that prevail among the membership or clergy of a particular generation. Rather, it is to be found in her consistent tendency for 2 millennia to produce saints. If a man suffers for weeks from a broken arm or a persistent flu, we don't, for that reason, judge him to be generally of poor health, nor do we do so even if such conditions recur from time to time. Someone of generally good health can suffer bouts of illness, and in the same way, the church's indefectibility and holiness are not undermined by the fact that in some generations she is especially afflicted with members and leaders who are foolish, wicked, or otherwise fail their mother and her divine spouse. The church, as it is said, thinks in centuries, and that is the scale at which she must be understood. We're going to this essay is going to be elaborating on that later, and I think that's going to be very pertinent to the message of this live stream. Naturally, the skeptic will have all sorts of questions, but getting into the details about what sorts of errors are compatible with the church's claim to infallibility is not what this post is about. I have addressed such matters elsewhere, see the links below. This post is primarily addressed to those who agree with, or at least sympathize with, the claims the Catholic Church makes about herself, but who are scandalized by the moral and theological crisis she is currently suffering through. And this is occasioned by Rod Dreher's recent comments on Catholic traditionalist writer Steve Skojec's Cri de Coeur about the state of the church. Cri de Coeur being a fancy term meaning passionate plea. Dreher famously left the Catholic Church for Eastern Orthodoxy some years ago after covering the clergy sexual abuse scandal as a journalist, and having understandably been appalled both by the evil perpetuated by the abusers and by the failure of the hierarchy to properly to respond to it. Skojec is appalled by this abuse as well, and also by the heterodoxy that has in recent years not only gone unchecked by the highest authorities in the church, but been positively aided and abetted by some of them. But he also bemoans the insularity, self-righteousness, ineffectiveness, and susceptibility to crackpot political ideas that he sees among too many of his fellow traditionalists. And his article was occasioned by outrage at some shabby treatment he says his family has been subjected to at his traditionalist parish. Skojec stops short of saying he is going to leave the church, but Dreher suggests that Skojec should consider following his own lead and switching to Eastern Orthodoxy. I know nothing about the people Skojec accuses of spiritual abuse, and thus have no comment on the fairness of his charges or on his personal situation, other than to say that he is obviously suffering, and I feel bad for him and wish him well. And while traditionalist Catholics are generally unfairly maligned, it is of course true that there are crackpots and insular and self-righteous people among them, as there are within any group, and that the political and ecclesiastical crises of recent years have exacerbated this. I also do not question Dreher's sincerity, and it is clear to anyone who has read his work over the years that he suffered greatly from what he uncovered while reporting on the sexual abuse scandal. I'm going to stop right there and say, um, I'm going to when he talks about traditionalists acting badly, this is something that a lot of Catholic YouTubers have noticed with some of the online trad cats, as they have been called. I mean, there's a reason why one of my favorite YouTubers, Settlers Lament, even though he is a Catholic, he calls himself anti-traditionalist, despite being very politically conservative and reactionary in his sympathies. And that is because there is a certain kind of traditionalist Catholicism is this kind of counterculture, and especially online, but also offline, it has all of the markings of a weird counterculture would have. So it has all the crackpots. It has the people there who just want to be edgy, and what these people will do, and you can see this with any countercultural group, white nationalists, neo-reactionaries, even a lot of left-wing groups. What these people will do is they'll indulge in all kinds of bizarre behaviors, crackpot ideas, and they'll castigate somebody through these weird rituals. They have these weird tests that they put other members through, and if you don't follow this test, then you're a possible betrayer to the counterculture, and they'll harass you for it. And because there's not really any kind of hierarchy involved here, there's going to be all kinds of weird rules perpetuated too. Like I've seen like some people on the internet talk about how they met a group of ethno nationalists who who will castigate any of their members who say hello or are polite to a non-white person, right? Weird things like that. And it's kind of it's kind of and and most of this is caused by pride. I would say most of this is caused by them being proud that they are not a normie, and for a remedy of this, I would recommend Chad Ripperger's essay. He has an essay on traditionalists, on the problems with traditionalists, uh, and we and I would also recommend there was a video by Renaissance Man about why you shouldn't think in terms of normies. And after this video live stream, I'm going to um, link those sources down in the description. Um, I see that I'm getting a lot of comments from Censored Anon. Censored Anon is talking about his view about Protestants. Um, my good man, I'd be. Let's see. Should I? Yeah, yeah. You know what? Since this is like me doing live commentary while reading this, I guess I can include you into the commentary too. So Censored Anon says, "Good stream. I don't know if you're going to do questions, but maybe you'd like to read this and give your thoughts. I'm a Protestant and have been that way my whole life. But in my studies on the root of liberalism and enlightenment have led me in my studies on the root of liberalism and enlightenment have led me to start thinking that maybe Protestantism is a form of liberalism in and of itself. That could be why we see endemic corruption with most of the Protestant churches. Everything devolving into this weird, evangelical, non denominational mass, which holds no central authority and looks primarily towards individual interpretation of the Bible for guidance." Well, as a Catholic, I totally agree that that individualist strain in Protestantism has been a problem for it as a denomination, and honestly, I do think that the notion of sola scriptura is philosophically problematic due to my view on how texts gain meaning and in my view of literature. But besides that, on Protestantism and liberalism, it's undoubtedly Protestantism and liberalism are very much linked together, as uh, as are things like Judaism and various cult ideas, and also some heretical strains of Catholicism too, uh, and even some Orthodox Catholics. I know that John Locke. There's a case to be made that John Locke got his idea of consent of the governed from some of the scholastic writers like Saint Robert Bellarmine and Francisco Suarez, who both of whom were both Thomists and Orthodox members of the church. And it's very difficult to disentangle all of that because it's because ideas tend to cross pollinate with each other, and that's going to be and trying to show, okay, well, this is the source of this, and this is the source of this. No, all of the different ideas sort of blend. All the different ideas tend to come from each other, even if we can trace back family lineages. I think the best way to describe liberalism and Protestantism and Catholicism is that these are heresies of each other. You know, Catholicism came first, and then Protestantism came next and was a heresy of Catholicism, and then liberalism was, you could call, a heresy of Protestantism. And so they have and that is the general genealogy of it. And of course, liberalism has had many different incarnations, some things that are similar, some things that are completely different. But what I would say is that when you're looking at Protestantism, try not to look at try not to judge it on based on like, oh, has modernity, how much has modernity corrupted this? Because all the different institutions that we see in the West have been corrupted by by liberalism, by leftism, by whatever, because it's the dominant force in society. What we should be looking at is these. We should be looking at things like Protestantism in their strongest form. You know, does Protestantism, by its nature, lend itself to a non-denominational mass? I, as a Catholic, would say it does, but if you investigate that, maybe you come to a different answer. So, but we're going to see now how um, that approach to things is very different from the approaches of Rod Dreher, as we shall see. The next part, Dreher's dramatics. I do, however, question Dreher's judgment, which is manifestly bad. This is why I like Ed Feser. He tells it like it is. And not an example for Skojek or anyone else to follow. By his own admission, Dreher's decision to leave the church was driven by emotion rather than reason. From what I can tell, he does not even claim to have any response to the arguments that once convinced him of the truth of Catholicism. He talks instead about how his heart was broken by the evil done by the abusers, the hypocrisy and corruption of the hierarchy, and the self-deception of well-meaning fellow Catholics. He talks about coming to see that his own commitment to Catholicism had been marred by pride and self-righteousness. He tells us that to be a good Christian, it is not enough to have good arguments and to follow the letter of the law. He tells us that in the days before he left the church, he had become so filled with anger that it blinded him to the good and holy things in the Catholic Church, and that leaving for Orthodoxy provided him a kind of release that led to a healthier spirituality. Well, that's all fair enough. The trouble is that it simply does not in any way entail that the claims the Catholic Church makes are false, and Dreher knows that. And again, he offers no counter arguments in response to the arguments he once took to be compelling. He also admits that exactly the same maladies that he saw when he was still Catholic can afflict and have afflicted every other movement, organization, and church, including Eastern Orthodoxy. Hence, he essentially acknowledges that he has no rational basis whatsoever for what he did, but was led by an emotional response to his own personal situation. Like all people who act contrary to reason, Dreher tries to rationalize his doing so with cliches about how we are creatures of emotion and not just intellect, how following rules and producing tidy arguments is not enough, etc. Of course, this is all muddle-headed. Dreher himself would not be impressed by this sort of rhetoric if it were offered by someone who disagreed with him. For example, Dreher is a Christian and one who embraces the traditional theological and moral teachings of the faith. If someone rejected all of that on the basis of some bad experience or emotional crisis and went on about how we are creatures of emotion, how rules are not enough, etc., Dreher would not take this to be a good reason to doubt the truth of Christianity. He would say that he feels for such a person and does not judge him, but that ultimately such a person is simply mistaken. What he does not seem to realize is that the same thing can be said about him. Like someone who understandably but wrongly rejects Christianity because of painful personal experiences, Dreher has understandably but wrongly rejected Catholicism because of his own personal painful experiences. So what is this to what is this saying? Well, and this is sort of the other way of going about this. Like you see a lot of the time. I've seen people who have intellectually converted away from a faith. Like I've even seen people who have been convinced by arguments against Catholicism and have given good reasons why they stopped being Catholic, or why they think Catholicism is wrong. But I've also seen things like this happen, and this is something that you do not want to do. It doesn't matter what your faith is, whether it's Protestant or Catholic or Orthodox. You do not want to abandon what you believe in just because you have a bad personal experience with a few people. And I'm going to give my own confession. I've recently had a lot of bad personal experiences with people who who they would be on the radical right. People like the people who are sympathetic to MGTOW and manosphere concerns, people who are more in the ethno-nationalist camp. I've had bad experiences with those people in the past. And yes, I can be a bit hard-headed when it comes to tooting my own horn, debating what I believe in. I stick to my guns on these things, and I'm very passionate about them. Um, and I've had a lot of bad experiences with these people. That doesn't mean that their ideas are wrong, though. That's the thing. What makes their ideas wrong is the fact that they're not true, and that they lead to immorality and muddled headedness and stuff. Not It's not that you shouldn't change your beliefs just because, oh, this person was mean to me. You have to have a good reason for it. Now, that kind of thing might be a good opportunity, perhaps when you've calmed down and thought things through more carefully and emotionally distanced yourself from that argument. You might take that opportunity to maybe rethink things, look at your inward principles, like why are if you have a bunch of bad experiences with right wingers, maybe you might want to take that time to think, why am I right wing? What are the principles that I follow that make me right wing, etc., etc. Right? But that's not a you have to go at it from a different angle than purely the emotional route, because as Edward Feser will say below, we are not purely emotional creatures. To continue, no doubt Dreher thinks there is more. No doubt Dreher thinks there's more to it than that, but he explicitly declines to offer any rational grounds for thinking that there is more to it than that. And when you start out by eschewing reason, you have, by definition, lost the argument. Dreher would regard such a judgment as too coldly logical, but of course, That is precisely to double down on the mistake rather than to show that it is not a mistake. Human beings are by nature rational creatures. Yes, we are more than that, but the point is that we are not less than that. Accordingly, though a sound worldview ought to satisfy our emotions, if it cannot also pass the test of rational justification, then of necessity it floats free from objective reality. Dreher knows this and rightly condemns subjectivism when he sees it in critical race theory, transgender extremism, and other malign ideologies and movements. He just doesn't see it in himself. This, i- this cognitive dissonance is why, despite eschewing reason, Dreher has for years been going on at length trying to justify his eschewal of reason. And therefore, succeeds only in tying himself in knots. I don't say this to condemn Dreher, who seems to be a good guy and whose writing I have enjoyed and profited from over the years, but it must be said when he is trying to lead others into making the same mistake he made. And yeah, Rod Dreher. Um, I mean, I share Dave the distributist's view of Rod Dreher in that Dreher is very much beholden to a lot of the prejudices of mainstream Christianity, and he doesn't really have much of an answer to a lot of the problems that he brings up. I mean, but going on from there, Providence's timetable. It is easy for writers whose focus is on politics and current events to be so too easily scandalized and impatient. This is probably especially so of us Americans. Our shining city on a hill idealism demands perfection in our institutions, leaders, and fellow citizens. When we don't get it, our can do mentality wants a solution to the problem and wants it now. When satisfaction isn't forthcoming, our don't tread on me mentality threatens to throw the bums out when we can and to pick up our marbles and go elsewhere when we cannot. Well, this is simply not how divine providence works. As scripture and church history make clear, Christ repeatedly warns us that we will face suffering, persecution, martyrdom, false teachers, and a degree of wickedness that will threaten to make our charity wax cold, and that this is part of the deal when we take up our cross and follow him. Why are we surprised when it happens? Do we suppose that he didn't really mean it? Skojek is scandalized by the fact that the confusion and heterodoxy fostered by Pope Francis's many doctrinally problematic statements have not yet been remedied, despite his having been in office for 8 years. This is quite ridiculous. 8 years is nothing in terms of church history. The utter chaos introduced into the governance of the church by Pope Stephen VI's lunatic cadaver synod lasted for decades. So did the chaos of the Great Western Schism. Pope Honorius, sorry, Honorius's errors were not condemned until 40 years after his death. Further examples could easily be given. Few people remember these events now because things eventually worked themselves out so completely that they now look like blips. If the world is still here centuries from now, Pope Francis's chaotic reign will look the same way to Catholics of the future. Then, of course, there is martyrdom. There is the martyrdom which the earliest Christians suffered for centuries, which Christians of recent decades have suffered under communism and Islamism, and which countless Christians have suffered in the centuries in between. Needless to say, this is worse than being treated shabbily by self righteous fellow Catholics or being disappointed by feckless bishops. All right, and yeah, this is sort of the point that I try to bring up in some of my other videos. Um, and this is sort of what gives me comfort in a lot of times. Um, people tend to live in the now all the time, and if you are plugged into the internet and plugged into the constant rage bait and the constant stream of news and current events, you see that there is always cause for despair. And indeed, there is a I do sincerely believe that darker times have yet to come. We are living in a relatively comfortable time. I don't believe that this will last for long. Um, and I think it's going to be a very long time before things get better. That said, if we look at the history of Western civilization, if you look at the history of the Catholic Church, you see that the the um, the church has always had these kinds of crises up and down its history. To give an example, the Cadaver Synod. So, uh, long story short, one of the popes, Pope Stephen VI, he decided that he didn't, for whatever reason, he didn't like his one of his predecessors. So he dug up his predecessor's cadaver, put the corpse on the throne, dressed him up, and then put the corpse on trial, and then declared that everything that pope had done was null and void. And this threw the entire church into chaos. And that pope ended up getting killed less than a year after he took office by an angry mob of peasants. Uh, a funny story, but you can imagine the level of insanity if something like that were to happen today. The level of insanity that would just be spewing out. The press would be going nuts about it, and I bet that people like Rod Dreher and all the rest would be saying, "Oh, this is why the Catholics are screwed." Um, but in truth, I think that a lot. I think if you look at things in terms of centuries, and I think we do need to look at things in terms of centuries, be low time preference rather than high time preference. There is cause for hope, and there is as much as there is cause for despair. And knowing that our ancestors went through hardships that equaled or even exceeded the hardships that we go through right now, um, is a source of comfort for us. And it puts things into perspective. All right. So, Censored Anon says, I found myself swayed by emotions in the past few years. Yeah, I mean, don't we all? This is a very good subject matter. I think many people in the past were swayed against Christianity merely because of poor experiences. Being dominated by emotions is in itself a vice. Yes, indeed. I think that poor experiences with Christians tends to drive people away from Christianity, which is why Christians are told to try and Christians are told to try to be gentle and kind to people, uh, because they want to present well for their faith. This doesn't mean being completely like a being pushover and flatterer, but it does mean being docile in a more masculine way. And what do I mean by this? I mean, well, first off, you just you don't want to be an asshole to people for no reason. That's just it. That's just uncivilized behavior. You also want to not get angry over every single harm people deliver to you, and turn the other cheek when you get a slap in the face, because honestly, not everything loss should be avenged. We should know when to pick our battles. Um, and I think and things like that. Maybe I should make a separate stream on this about the idea of turning the other cheek and what Christian politeness and Christian friendliness means. So, good reaction. 21st reaction is here, and he says most quote unquote Christians are nothing of the sort. People aren't interested in it because it has lost all its salt and substance. Yes, yes, indeed, my friend. I was. It's and I'm going to come back to this towards the end of my live stream when I talk about what Rod Dreher actually said in his article. But if you look at Rod Dreher's work and you look at some of the things that he's said in the past, it's clear that the reason he left Catholicism so readily for such emotional reasons is that he didn't really believe or understand what Catholicism believe in or understand what Catholicism was about. He didn't understand anything about the papacy. He didn't understand anything about like some of the stuff that the Catholic Church is about, and I think that the one of the things that the and it's no wonder that he eventually left. He didn't really have any kind of personal attachment. He was just there because he felt like it was just his in group. He just felt like, oh, this is just my in group. I happen to be a part of it, and I don't really know. And maybe he was just a Catholic because, well, yeah, because of his pride, and not because he had he had the salt and substance of a Christian. So good on you, 21st reaction. And now we're going to get. So what Feser was saying here has been the substance. Now we're going to get to the salt of it. The thing that makes Feser's piece tasty, in other words. So it let's. Oh, wait. Hold on. Oh, dadgunt. There. All right, right. For some reason, I got clicked off. In no way do I mean to mock Skojek's or Dreher's evident pain. On the contrary, I still feel for them. But pain can blind us to reason and to our own duty. And it can blind us to the fact that we do not suffer it alone, that Christ permits us to undergo it only because he suffered it himself. We need to put suffering into perspective, to unite it with Christ's suffering, and to accept it in a spirit of penance and solidarity with others who suffer, especially those who suffer worse. We need to keep in mind that in the church at large, Christ will set things right in his own good time. And we need to focus on the fact that in that part of the church over which each of us does have control, namely the state of our own souls, we need endure only for the 80 that is the most that most of us have. It's personal. Dreher, Skojek, and others scandalized by by the state of the church may still find this too bloodless and impersonal. Fair enough. I return then to the point with which I began, which is that the church is a personal institution. When a Catholic abandons her, it is not like quitting a political party or canceling a subscription or deciding no longer to use a company's products. It is more like breaking off a relationship with another human being. But in fact, it is even worse than that. When a Catholic leaves the church because he is scandalized by heresy, sexual abuse, and the like, this is like fleeing the scene when one's mother is being attacked, lest one suffer harm oneself. It is to abandon Holy Mother Church, the bride of Christ, to the heretics and perverts, rather than to aid her against them and to suffer with her while they assail her. The matter couldn't be less academic. What is in question is no mere intellectual error. It is a matter of personal loyalty or betrayal. Or don't we believe what Christ said about the nature of the church for which he himself suffered and died? And that's the end of that essay. Right. So I think that we I think that Feser here puts it very succinctly. This is a matter of loyalty to the church and loyalty to God. If you don't have a re like the if you believe that the Catholic Church eh, is God's representative on earth. If you believe that Holy Mother Church is the bride of Christ, and that only through her sacraments can we be saved, then you should not abandon her to basically infiltrators and subverters and deviants. All right, that's I mean, you wouldn't abandon your family just because they were being attacked by people. That would be cowardice in a way. Um, and you can say, oh well, Holy Mother Church, she's sick and all. Yeah, she's always sick and she's always corrupt and stuff. Well, if that's the case, if you believe that Holy Mother Church is truly corrupt in her character, then you aren't a Catholic in any real sense. Because part of the Catholic faith is believing that um, Christ preserves the holiness of the church. And if you and I do recommend looking at the arguments for why the church is holy, um, and why the and if your church doesn't have this kind of guarantee, um, then why are you a part of that church? In all honesty, I think that being a part of but in any case, you shouldn't just abandon your faith just because there are bad actors within the church. That's not a good reason to abandon the faith. That's a good reason to stay in and fight. Um, yeah, pretty obvious that Dreher didn't switch to orthodoxy based on historical arguments. Well, as far as I can tell from what Dreher has said in the past, he as a Catholic, he had problem. He couldn't understand the arguments for papal primacy, and the only reason he was a Catholic was just because he just so happened to be in the church. And so when once he had an emotional attachment, and once that emotional attachment was broken by scandal, um, he didn't have any rational reason to be in the church, so he left. Like 21st Reaction said, their faith have their his faith lacked the substance and the salt, and so all he had left was a kind of vague emotional attachment. And once that's gone, well, then there's no reason to stick around, is there? So good, good on you for saying that. Censored Anon, I will be planning to do. I will definitely try one day to create a live stream on turn the other cheek and Christian kindness and things like that. And I'll be covering them from a Thomistic perspective and a virtue ethics perspective. But it's but if you aren't, even if you aren't a Thomist, Christians, I believe of all denominations will benefit from the fruits of Saint Thomas's opinions on the matter. So uh, be sure to look out for that. I'm going to put the link to Ed Feser's article is in the show notes. If you're free to check that out, and I'm going to put in Chad Ripperger's problems with traditionalist Catholics, as well as the video by Renaissance Man on why you shouldn't think in terms of normies in the description after this live stream. So check those things out just in case. Um, I hope that you all have a wonderful day today. Um, let's see. Any is there any other anybody who wants to comment? We can leave a comment in the next few seconds. But if you otherwise, I think that about wraps things up. Again, again, God bless everybody. Stay if you're Catholic, stay Catholic. If you're discerning, try look for the truth and don't let your emotions guide your actions. Let your reason guide your actions. Let the truth guide your actions. All right. Ave Maria, everybody. God bless.